Using the air conditioning in your car during the winter months may sound wasteful, but actually it could save you a whole bunch of money and make your car safer to drive. So in this video, I'm going to explain the advantages of using the air conditioning during the colder months, but also, if you're lucky enough to have it, what the auto button actually does, because it probably does a lot more than you think. So why on earth would you want to use the air conditioning when it is cold outside? Surely air conditioning is there to keep you cool inside when it's hot outside. Air conditioning does more than just cool the air. It also dehumidifies the air. And if it's cold and wet outside, your windows are going to be prone to misting up. And if you use air conditioning, you can blow dry air onto the windows, and that's going to free the windows of mist very quickly. But also that dry air is going to lower the humidity in the car, meaning that even without the window demisters on, it's going to prevent your windows from getting misted up anyway, so you won't need to demist them. Is it possible to keep your windows free from mist without air conditioning? Well, of course it is. People have been doing it for decades, and I have myself as well, because not all my cars I've had have had air conditioning. But you don't always win the battle. Sometimes you lose. An example would be, it's cold and wet outside. 4 slightly damp people, because it's a bit wet, have jumped in the car, breathing moisture, and the moisture on themselves, on their clothes and their hair, is starting to evaporate. Your windows are going to get misty, and no matter what you do, you may lose the battle and have to resort to wiping the mist off, which is not ideal when you're driving, because trying to do this when you're driving isn't necessarily safe. You may think, well, do it when you stop to the side of the road, but you can't always stop at the side of the road. You can do it before you get going and get misty again. And how are you going to get your blind spots for changing lane? So it's fairly obvious, having misted up windows is not safe. Therefore, air conditioning can make driving safer, because it can help keep your windows clear from mist, and it's actually very powerful at doing this. It really works. But does it cost you a lot of money? And this is actually my inspiration for making this video, because air conditioning has come a long way, and it did so a very long time ago. And when I say a very long time, I mean around about 20 years. It didn't happen all at once, but in the early 2000s, air conditioning systems on cars took a noticeable step up in efficiency. They have continued to improve since then, but back then that was a noticeable change. And these systems, yes, they still use fuel when it's hot outside. So when it's hot outside and you've got your air conditioning running, you're going to notice you're getting worse fuel economy and you're spending more on fuel. But as the temperature outside starts to cool and you get to that stage where you think, I don't really need the air conditioning on anymore, I will turn it off. You're not actually going to be saving yourself much money. You're probably not going to notice the difference, because the system has already kind of turned itself off anyway. It's not completely turned itself off, but it's ramped right down, and it's doing very little work and taking very little power from the engine. What it is doing is acting as a dehumidifier to try and keep the humidity in the car lower, but it doesn't take much energy to do that. If you are someone who turns their air conditioning off for long periods of time, it is actually recommended you turn it on every so often to make sure it stays working, because if you do turn it off for long periods of time, that can lead to a big bill. That actually is one of the causes of failure of air conditioning systems. So it is recommended to run it regularly to keep it working, but in many owners' manuals of cars, including this one, it is actually recommended you just leave it on. The first car I bought with a more efficient air conditioning system was a 2003 Seat Ibiza with climate control, and I was a bit confused when I got that car, because I bought a car that I thought had air conditioning, but I couldn't see an air conditioning button anywhere. I was like, how do you turn the air conditioning on? So I went into the owner's manual, and it turned out by default air conditioning was just on. It was on unless you press the button to turn it off, and that was the Econ button. So the attitude there was air conditioning is on unless you turn the air conditioning off. The econ button would disable it completely and give you the best chance of getting the best fuel economy possible. But in that car, it was the first car I had where I didn't really notice a difference between air conditioning being on or off when it comes to performance or fuel economy, unless it really was a hot day. But a couple of cars before that I owned was a 2000 Vauxhall Astra with a much earlier air conditioning system, and it didn't matter how hot or cold it was outside. If I pressed the AC button, I would hear the engine physically strain. You'd hear the air conditioning kick in, the engine would make a deeper sound, performance was blunted, and of course, as a result, because the engine is having to work harder to turn the compressor, fuel economy was reduced. This car actually tells me how much fuel some of the ancillary components use, and two of the components it does tell me about are the air conditioning and the rear heated window. And what's interesting is on a cold day, the rear heated window uses double the fuel that the air conditioning uses. So actually, it costs me less in the winter to leave the air conditioning on and use it as a dehumidifier to prevent the windows from misting up than to leave the rear heated window on to stop the rear window from misting up. If you're wondering why the rear heated window uses fuel, and it's because it uses electricity, and ultimately your engine generates that electricity via the alternator, and the more electricity it has to generate, well, the more fuel the engine's going to use. Earlier I said the auto setting on your climate control probably does more than you think, so I'm going to go into that now in this video. The first and most obvious job of auto is to reach and maintain a set temperature. So you've asked for 21 degrees, it now knows, let's get the cabin to 21 degrees Celsius and maintain it. And in many systems you can actually control how quickly it tries to get there. In this car I can go into the touchscreen and choose between low, medium and high. Low is going to get to that temperature gently, and high is going to run the fan harder and try and get to that temperature more quickly. Now the next things I'm going to talk about, not all cars necessarily do, but many do this. Bear in mind, this is a 10.5-year-old Seat. It's not a special car, yet it does all of these things. Look into your auto setting on your climate control because it may be smarter than you think. What this car can do, and many other cars can do, is control the humidity. It has a humidity sensor and an infrared sensor on the windscreen, and using that data it can calculate the dew point, and with that it can run the air conditioning in a way to prevent mist from forming on the windows. It also has two sun intensity sensors. You ask for 21 degrees and it goes, okay, you want 21 degrees, but I can feel the passenger has a lot of sun on their side. I'm going to blow slightly cooler air over them just to make them feel a little bit more comfortable. And it can do it for the driver's side as well, or if the sun's somewhere in the middle, it might do it for both. Many have sun intensity sensors, some only have one though, but this is two zone. Another sensor that's quite common is an air quality sensor, and what that does is it measures pollution outside the car, and if it detects you're driving into a polluted area, it will recirculate the air inside the car to prevent you drawing in and breathing in polluted air from the outside. And when you get through the pollution, it will then bring in the fresh air. It does have limitations on when it will do that. It doesn't want to do that. It doesn't want to recirculate the air inside the car if it thinks that's going to cause the windows to mist up. But it does depend on the circumstances. Also, it can prevent bad smells. If I leave the air conditioning on and it on auto, it can prevent the evaporator from getting mold and mildew on it. And if you turn your air conditioning off and leave it a while and turn it back on, sometimes you'll notice, oh, what's that terrible smell? Well, that's mold and mildew, and it's not great. You don't really want to be breathing that in. You can disinfect the car, but it's expensive. You can get one of these cans and let it off in the car and let it circulate, but they don't really do that much. If you want to do it properly, it's quite often a multi-stage process, and you probably need a mechanic to help you do it. So it's best not to let that mold and mildew form in the evaporator to begin with. Leaving on auto, in many cars, that's going to prevent that from happening. I don't get that bad smell in this car and I leave it on auto with the air conditioning on most of the time. So look into it. The auto setting on your car, if you have it, may be smarter than you think. If you're worried about using your air conditioning when it's really cold outside because it could damage something, you don't need to worry about that anymore, because engineers have sorted that. They've thought about that when they've been designing the system. And if you're worried about having to turn the air conditioning off before you turn the engine off, so that when you turn the engine on, the air conditioning doesn't come on straight away, putting strain on the starter motor, you don't have to worry about that either, because engineers have thought about that too. Air conditioning has been in cars for a long time, and it has been standard, pretty much standard, for a long time also. If you want to save money, what you actually want to do is turn the air conditioning off when it's hot outside, because that's actually when it's costing you money. But do you want to do that? Let's say it's 3 degrees Celsius outside and you walk out to your car, cold interior and cold engine. It's a petrol or diesel car, and you think, I need to heat this up as quick as I can. So you turn the engine on, put the heater up to max and put the fan up to max. All you're going to be doing is blowing cold air onto yourself, because the heat comes from the engine, and if the engine isn't warm, there's no warm air to blow. The auto setting on your climate control understands this, and it will only blow warm air as it becomes available as the engine gradually heats up. And as the engine gets hotter, it will blow that warm air more intensely. Yes, some cars do have auxiliary heaters to help with this, but not many do in Great Britain, and electric cars have different systems which are able to provide heat much more quickly. I do find that the temperatures aren't exactly accurate though. So in this Seat Leon, if I set it to 20 degrees, I feel comfortable. But in my Mazda MX-5, to feel the same, I have to set it to 22 degrees. And in my other half's Toyota Corolla, I find I'm setting it at 23 degrees. And she agrees with me. In the Corolla, we need a higher set temperature to feel the same as we do in the Leon. It's not a big deal though, because once you know what number works in that car for you, it is consistent. So when this is 20, it always feels the same in here, as does in my Mazda. I set it to 22, I know I'm going to be comfortable. I just have to learn each car. And what I generally do when I get in a new car is I set it at 21, and then if I'm feeling hot or cold, I adjust the temperature accordingly. If you do have manual air conditioning, it should still be smart enough not to run the compressor hard all the time, even when it's cool outside. It's just you have to control the temperature and the fan speed yourself. And with those systems, although some people do prefer them, I find them a bit of a faff, because I'm constantly being a bit too hot and a bit too cold, and I'm having to keep turning the knobs, and depending on the temperature outside, that's going to affect how hot I need it to be or how cold it needs to be, so I never really know where to turn the knob. But with climate control, I know if I set that to 20 in this car, it's going to be this temperature, whatever the temperature is outside, and it's going to be consistent. Come to think about it, actually, probably the reason why I like climate control so much is because I spend so long in a car. Most days I spend a minimum of 3 hours in the car, and today I've spent, I think, about 8 hours so far, probably a bit more. I'm having to do some maths in my head, and I'm not done yet. If I was just using a car for 20 minutes at a time, 2, maybe 3 times a day, I probably wouldn't care very much, because I just want it to be warm when it's cold outside and cold when it's hot outside, and I won't have to keep faffing with it every 10-15 minutes getting hot and cold. It wouldn't be such a problem. But if I'm sat in an environment for long periods of time, it's nice if there is a nice set steady temperature. So I guess the usage determines whether or not you feel it's necessary or whether or not you even like it. So in short, yes, you can use your air conditioning when it's cold outside, and there is a benefit to doing so. Also, if your car isn't old, let's say less than around about 15 years old, it's unlikely you're going to notice a difference in your fuel bills from leaving your air conditioning on when it's cold outside. But it may actually save you an expensive repair bill, because leaving automotive air conditioning systems off for a long period of time does make them less reliable. They're more reliable when they're run regularly. Well, I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're looking for car insurance, check out the links to Collingwood and Confused in the description. If you're learning to drive and want to insure yourself on somebody else's car, then Collingwood are there for you, because you can do so without affecting the owner's policy, and that takes away a big stress from the owner of that car that you're using to practice your driving in. And via the link at the moment, there's up to 35% off and a £20 Amazon gift card. If you want to insure your own car, check out the link to confused.com, because you fill out one quote form and get loads of quotes back from many insurers to compare who's cheapest, and you can change your car on that quote as many times as you like without having to do the whole quote again. So it's a quick and easy way to compare how much it costs to insure different cars. Using the links doesn't cost you anything, but it does support the channel, so thank you very much. Subscribe to get my future videos, and until the next one, cheerio.